Hello everyone, thank you very much for having me. My name is Greta Caprara. I am a researcher and nutritionist at the European Institute of Oncology in Milano, Italy. Scientific dissemination is also one of my tasks, with the aim of engaging people in healthy eating and lifestyle in order to prevent their risk of developing chronic diseases. So, in this presentation, I'd like to give you an overview of the most up-to-date and authoritative research on the link between alcohol consumption and the risk of cancer. In 2018, the World Health Organization found that the so-called non-communicable diseases, also known as chronic diseases, are responsible for 71% of all death globally. And as you can see here, cardiovascular diseases account for most non-communicable diseases death, and they are immediately followed by cancers. Cancer process is not activated by a unique triggering element. Instead, several factors cooperate to initiate it, such as host factors, for instance, our genetics, our microbiota, environmental factors, such as food contaminants, UV radiation, and also diet and lifestyle factors. Cancer risk factors can be grouped in two main categories, namely non-modifiable risk factors, such as our age, gender, ethnicity, familial risks, because we cannot change them, and modifiable risk factors, smoke, diet, physical activity, excess of sun exposure, because actually, if we want, we can do something to modify these behaviors. In agreement with that, nearly 50% of the most common cancers can be prevented simply by, for instance, eating well, staying lean, moving more, avoiding smoke, protecting our skin from the excess of sun, and getting vaccinated. Speaking about diet, we also need to take into account alcoholic beverages. However, before going to the core of this presentation, let's see some quick facts and figures about alcohol consumption. WHO reported that in 2016, harmful use of alcohol caused 3 million deaths globally. In the same year, 2.3 billion drinkers were identified, and it was established that they drank on average 33 grams of pure alcohol per day, meaning, for instance, 3 glasses of wine, considering each glass of wine containing more or less 100 ml of liquids. Those drinkers consumed this kind of proportion of alcohol, meaning mainly spirits, the 45 almost percent, followed by 34% of beer, almost 12% of wine, and the remaining 9% other kind of alcoholic beverages. The 3 million deaths caused by alcohol originated from, for instance, digestive diseases or unintentional injuries. And here you can see also malignant neoplasms, meaning cancers. As I've said at the beginning of the talk, I'm going to show you the most authoritative research on the link between alcohol consumption and the risk of cancers. That's why I will start presenting you the analysis of the global evidence done by the World Cancer Research Fund International on this subject. For those of you that are not aware, World Cancer Research Fund International is the leading authority on cancer prevention research related to diet, weight, and physical activity. It is a not-for-profit organization which unifies a network of cancer prevention charities, which are located in the US, UK, the Netherlands, and Hong Kong. Since it started in 1982, WCRF has been the pioneer in research and health information on the link between food, nutrition, physical activity, and cancer prevention. WCRF aims are mainly two, meaning systematically review the most accurate literature from all around the world in order to evaluate the evidence on diet, lifestyle, and cancer risk, and then to draw prevention recommendations to help people to reduce their risk to develop tumors and also to improve survival and quality of life after a cancer diagnosis. The evidence and cancer prevention recommendations are presented in the so-called expert reports, and here you can see the latest, the third expert report published in 2018. This cartoon resumes the WCRF cancer prevention recommendations, which include, of course, not smoking and avoid excessive sun exposures. Importantly, following those recommendations also help to prevent other chronic diseases. You can see that among them, there is the recommendation regarding alcohol consumption, which says limit alcohol consumption. Specifically, the recommendation states that for cancer prevention, it's best not to drink alcohol. Together with the expert report, WCRF also published reports which analyze findings by cancers, as you can see here. For instance, in fact, those are the ones on how diet, nutrition, and physical activity can affect breast, prostate, and ovarian cancer risk. And also, they publish reports which analyze findings by the so-called exposures, meaning how food, body weight, physical activity, and so on can influence tumor risk. This is, for instance, the one on how meat, fish, and dairy products can affect cancer risk. Of course, the WCRF also published the report on alcoholic drinks and the risk of cancer. This is an example of the so-called evidence matrix, which is used by WCRF to give recommendations. As you can see here, only evidence of causality between an exposure and the risk of cancer, classified as strong, convincing, or probable, are used to make recommendations. Let's see then what's the evidence on alcoholic drinks and the risk of cancer. We have said that we have seen that the recommendation says limit alcohol consumption, and specifically for cancer prevention, it's best not to drink alcohol. Why? Because alcohol abuse can increase the risk of cancer development in 8 sites, meaning mouth, pharynx, and larynx, esophagus, liver, colorectal, breast, and stomach. The conclusions for alcoholic drinks and liver and stomach cancers were based on evidence for alcohol intakes above 3 drinks a day, while those for colorectum above 2 drinks a day. No threshold level of alcohol intake was identified in the evidence for alcoholic drinks, and the risk of cancer of mouth, pharynx, and larynx, esophagus, and breast post or pre-menopause. Regarding kidney cancer, they found evidence of a protective effect, but only below 2 drinks a day. Risk, in fact, is unclear above this intake. Interestingly, WCRF also analyzed the dose-response relationship between alcohol consumption and cancer risk, and it was found that every 10 grams of increase in alcohol consumption per day causes an increase in the risk of developing some kind of cancers. For instance, here you can see that esophageal cancer risk increases by 25%, oral cavity plus pharyngeal by 19%, postmenopausal breast cancer by 9%. Limited evidence, so not strong enough to give recommendations but still suggestive, indicates moreover that alcohol consumption increases the risk of developing also pancreatic cancer above 3 drinks a day, and lung and skin cancers where no threshold level was identified. So, what does it mean to limit alcohol consumption? Always remembering that for cancer prevention it's best not to drink alcohol. It means that if you want to consume alcoholic drinks, you must not exceed your national guidelines, where we should say that national guidelines are quite similar globally, and most of them suggest to consume no more than 2 units of alcohol per day if you are a man, up to 1 unit of alcohol per day if you are a woman, where 1 unit of alcohol corresponds more or less to 12.5 grams of ethanol. This quantity is contained in a blonde beer, a glass of 330 ml, or a glass of wine of 125 ml, or a cocktail of 80 ml, or a distilled spirit of 40 ml. However, it is important to note that it's the alcohol itself that causes damages. It doesn't matter whether you drink wine or spirit. All types of alcoholic drinks can cause cancer. In this regard, you may have heard that drinking alcohol can be good for cardiovascular health. Actually, this evidence is not clear. In fact, most of the studies on this relationship are observational, and there is no safe drinking level. Moreover, drinking more than 1 drink a day for women and 2 for men increases not only the risk of cardiovascular diseases, but also its link to more than 200 diseases and injury conditions. Among them, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, early dementia, and fetal alcohol syndrome. Accordingly, healthcare professionals should not advise non drinkers to consume alcohol in order to reduce cardiovascular disease risk. So, you should not drink alcohol for health benefit, and remember that the risk of cancer increases even drinking small amounts of alcohol. In agreement with that, the latest European Society of Cardiology guidelines on cardiovascular disease prevention recommend to consume a maximum of 100 grams of alcohol per week, which is more or less 14.3 grams a day, meaning less than 2 alcoholic units. Moreover, very recent guidelines do not support the apparently protective effect of moderate amounts versus no alcohol consumption against atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, suggesting instead that the lowest risks for cardiovascular disease outcomes are in abstainers. Moreover, they state that any amount of alcohol uniformly increases blood pressure. So, in conclusion, these guidelines in a way challenge the common belief that moderate alcohol consumption is associated with lower CVD risk. Besides all that, of course, it is important to point out also all the situations in which you must always avoid alcohol. For instance, if you are a child or a teen, if you are pregnant or trying to become, and if you are breastfeeding. But how does alcohol mechanistically cause cancer? Three main ways have been identified, which are simply resumed in this cartoon. First of all, ethanol can induce oxidative stress, which in turn causes cellular damage, in particular DNA damage, and renders in this way cells unable to efficiently repair this kind of injury. Then also it can affect pathways involved in the control of cellular division, rendering cells more likely to divide, thus increasing the chance that cancer will develop. And finally, alcohol makes it easier for cells in our mouth and throat to absorb cancer-causing chemicals. And in this cartoon, you can see more in details a way in which ethanol can cause cancer. Basically, ethanol is toxic to us, and so it must be converted into a compound which is called acetate that eventually can be used by our body as a source of energy. But to do that, two enzymes are involved, are necessary, namely alcohol dehydrogenase, ADH, and acetaldehyde dehydrogenase, ALDH. What happened? If a small amount of alcohol is drunk, the body can process it so that it passes through without making much damage. But instead, if a large amount of alcohol is drunk, the body can process it fast enough, so there is a kind of build-up of acetaldehyde, which is toxic to us because it is able to cause DNA damages, specifically mistakes in DNA, chromosome rearrangements, and it is also able to cause DNA to bind and form clumps. Another way acetaldehyde can accumulate depends on, functional defects of the enzyme ALDH. In fact, people with mistakes in the genetic code of this enzyme can't break down efficiently, can't break down acetaldehyde, and so they are more prone to certain cancers. As you may know, mistakes in ALDH are quite common among Asian populations. So I'd like to conclude this presentation showing you a paper that came out on Lancet Oncology a few months ago. This paper describes the contribution of alcohol consumption on the global burden of new cancer cases in 2020. The authors estimate that globally the 4.1% of all new cases of cancer in 2020 were attributable to alcohol consumption. In agreement with the WCRF report, alcohol mainly affected the development of esophagus, liver, and breast cancers. Moreover, they reported that consuming more than 60 grams a day of alcohol contributed to the development of almost 47% of all new cancer cases. Consuming an amount ranging from 20 to 60 grams of alcohol instead contributed to almost the 40% of new cancer cases. And finally, also an amount lower than 20 grams that they define moderate is able to contribute to almost 14% of all new cancer cases. Finally, they demonstrated that drinking up to 10 grams per day of alcohol contributed to the 5.66% of all new alcohol attributable cases globally. Here you can see some of the references I've used to prepare this presentation, which I invite you to check if you are interested in deepening your knowledge on the relationship between alcohol consumption and health, and in particular the risk of cancer. Well, this slide brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you so much again for having me, and of course for your kind attention.